Welcome to another episode of the Liberator podcast. This is episode 79 of the Liberator podcast, and miraculously I can speak again just after the rally yesterday.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I worried when you were texting, come, we need to film. And I'm like, why don't you guys just film? I'm on my way back from Edmond.
Yeah.
And I did think, oh, because Sam probably doesn't have a voice.
Then I called you, and that ruined everything. You would have been here sooner had I not showed you that my voice was somewhat okay.
It was playing Hitler last night that saved him.
Playing Hitler?
Secret Hitler. It's a game.
Sam was up really late playing Hitler again.
It's not a reenactment. Hitler is the bad guy.
Hitler's back.
Just to be clear. So I'm here with Russell Hunter, as usual, and our good friend, Cali. Thanks for coming on, Cali.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Cali's in town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cali's in town for the
And since you're here and you're
conference.
so comfortable, because you've been on so many times, I'm just going to adjust this to make sure you're talking into it.
I just realized this. You've been on the show more than anybody else.
Yep.
That's what's up.
Mm-hmm.
Dang. Yep.
3 times.
That
I
means
think?
we like you better than everyone else.
Or you like us better. You're willing to come here more than everybody else. I think it's like you and like Bill Askell's been here a couple times.
One thing I appreciate about this time as opposed to the other ones is you've finally invested in an espresso machine.
Mm-hmm. Just for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't use it except for when you're here.
So the thing, that one that you have, that used to be our travel type one. And so it's
familiar.
nostalgic. You know?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
We'll
so
come
it's
back
good.
anytime for the espresso. We'll put a sheet over it or something and keep
Right.
on. I'm a pour over guy. People are like, why are they talking about this? So why are we talking? Why are you here? We've got to get to that.
Yeah. I think this episode has been missing. We've got a lot of good topics on our, if you go through all the podcasts of Free the States, you're going to see a lot of really good educational stuff. But we haven't really touched IVF, and Cali is making a documentary.
Right.
Weeping Time, I believe
Correct.
it's called. And it is going to be really important, I would say.
So the magnitude of how many image bearers are lost, murdered, discarded, abandoned from IVF, and that we haven't. What episode is this?
79.
It's pretty bad. I know we've brought it up before, and had Josh Malone. And he's talked about it a little bit, but we've.
So here's the thing.
to get
Here's
to
why
this.
it's called Weeping Time, right? So the largest sale of humans in American history, slave auction, happened in Georgia over a 2-day period. And historically, it's been called the Weeping Time. Yeah. So when I started this project, I want to connect the sale and treatment of humans as property then, and go, okay, so with all the technology and everything we have now, how are we still doing that same treatment of humans as property in IVF, embryo adoption, and these kind of things? Because we have close to 2 million humans frozen in liquid nitrogen right now in the United States, and that increases by 12% every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that number right there is crazy.
It's insane.
Well, yeah. What was going on in the slave pens and the slave trades auctions and all that, it was awful. But we're talking about just numbers wise,
Right.
dwarfing it.
Right.
And the really crazy thing here is, like, you can go into a church and denounce abortion and you'll get amens, and people will clap and they'll applaud and they'll say, yeah, you're exactly right. But when it comes to IVF, you get hushed silence and even anger.
A lot of support for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that I've really tried to do in this project is balance out compassion for couples that are suffering from infertility, because these are real humans in our congregations, right? And they really are suffering because they understand that God commands us to be fruitful and multiply, right?
Yeah.
And we need to make a distinction between intentionally not having children and God closing your womb. And there's a lot of real suffering with couples that want to have children.
And always has been. Like you read the Bible, the people are really concerned. Why am I not having children, Lord?
It's godly desire.
Yeah.
It's like to want to have children.
It's a good thing to have families. They know it's a good thing to have families. So we need to really come alongside them and walk with them and suffer with them and have sorrow with them.
Yeah.
And at the same time, warn them about idolatry.
Yeah.
Because that's really the root of how this becomes evil, right? But as we look through the incarnation and how we're to understand this, at what point is wanting a good thing, a good gift from God, a blessing from God and family, at what point does that become idolatry, where that is the thing that we say is the thing that's going to satisfy us? What am I willing to do in order to have a child after my own likeness, my own biological DNA? Am I willing to have other children killed? Am I willing to have other children frozen and incarcerated without due process? Right. So it's a sense of idolatry, and we need to warn them of that idolatry.
Yeah, and this is really good for sort of giving some some points to be made before we get into it really. But I think that for a lot of people, they don't even know what IVF is. So let's just assume total ignorance on this thing. What is IVF? What does that stand for? What is it?
Right. So this is going to be a super reductionist view of IVF because we're limited on time. Right. So in vitro fertilization just means that it is outside of the organism. Right.
In vitro, in glass, I guess.
Right, in glass, right. And usually when we talk about it, it's like we're talking about fertilization that happens outside of the organism versus in vivo, which is inside the organism, right? So generically in IVF, there's two basic stages. Normally, women they already have a set number of eggs. Right.
Harvested previously.
Well, no. There's a set number of eggs.
Just in women. Yes,
in women,
yes.
Right. And once a month, usually one egg
is released.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have two, sometimes you have three, and that's how you get
But the general thing, this is, for all the kids watching at home, this is the monthly cycle.
Right. So there's one egg. So what they do is the women go through hormone treatment to stimulate the release of multiple eggs. And usually they harvest, recover, rescue. Those are some of the words they use.
Oh yeah, make it better.
Yeah, between 10 and 20 eggs. Okay. Then they fertilize those eggs outside of the womb. And freeze them. Usually. Then the second process is when they do the transfer. The woman goes through another series of hormone treatments that time the thawing of the egg with the body that has been tricked into thinking that they're pregnant. Right.
And not to interrupt your chain of thought here, but I didn't know about this, and this was really crazy to me. But they grade the embryos once they have them.
Okay, so once they fertilize, there's a whole line of attrition that happens once you have the mature egg, and then you fertilize it, from how many eggs you start out with to how many actually make it to fertilization. Then of those, over a 3 to 5 day period, they start doing genetic testing how many cells are going to be the placenta, how many cells are going to make up the amniotic sac.
Yeah, they're grading the embryos.
Right.
They're looking at them and saying, which is the fittest.
But it's a lie. It's a myth. Like even IVF doctors will tell you, okay, this is how we grade it, but we don't really know. This is just...
Yeah.
This is the best cells. However, you can have one of the best ones and it doesn't turn out, and you can have the worst graded one and everything comes out
well,
fine.
when you're dealing with people who are paying you thousands and thousands of dollars,
Right.
and you've been doing this process and you've been messing with your hormones and taking these shots and all this
Right.
kind of stuff, the doctor comes back and says the two that we're going to put
Are the
in you
highest
now
graded,
are the
right.
are the highest graded. But it's kind of like, well, can we just we all know that you can take someone who's like the most fit person and the person, I mean, it's like the
Right.
movie Gattaca for people who've been around a long time. It's like, it's not necessarily, you
Be
can't just
the
look at a
invalid.
person's,
Yeah.
the invalid is the one who wins the race. And you're like, what? How did that happen? So,
Yeah, it's weird how he was the protagonist in that movie, and look at where we are now. But that's an aside.
Yeah.
So part of this grading thing is why I came up with the title "Weeping Time," because you're treating these humans and grading these humans based off of how you think they are going to perform.
Yeah.
You also do genetic testing on, are they male, female, Down syndrome, a whole litany of defects, right, that you can have. And how different is that than going to a slave auction and going, all right, I need a slave that is this tall, that is this
Which is
fit, that can
exactly
do
what they do.
that thing, and you're buying
Or
that
checking a horse's
human-
teeth, you know, it's like
Right, right. So you're breeding these humans for production, and you're choosing the ones you want for the thing that you want.
yeah, not to put too sharp of a point on it, but we started with a joke because they were playing Secret Hitler, a
Right.
game, and we had you're being Hitler.
Right, you are.
Yeah, it's awful. And to get it back to like this compassion that we need to have for people is all of this gets shrouded in like rescue language and all that
Right.
sort of thing that I think a lot of folks like that may be watching this or hear about it or whatever are thinking like, did that guy just call me Hitler? And I'm like, well, no, but the process that's going on is eugenic.
Right.
It is like, I mean, going through the slave pens and the guys who are selling the slaves, the way that they're looking at the embryos and making a judgment, this one's more healthy than this one, is like the slave trader who's done something to hide the dysentery
Right.
of a slave and told the person who's buying them, "It's great."
Right.
You know, it's just, it's the same stuff.
And so we're talking about like IVF, like it's couples going in that are infertile to do it, and that is true. But the vast majority of people that use IVF are like homosexuals, or
the vast majority.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or you know, like this is also going to include like sperm donation, surrogacy. Like it's huge. It's not just
and to get into that too is like when we talk about sperm donation, for instance,
or egg donation. Or
I for me, like just for a long time, totally would disconnect that from anything related to IVF. Like I
Right.
just think, oh, sperm donation, that's
right.
some like
What do you
that's
think they were
different.
doing with them?
It I don't know. I just didn't connect the dots at all.
But like you literally go to the office, they open a book and go, okay, do you want a male or female? Do you
How
want
tall,
somebody
what
this
color?
tall? Here's the IQ of the parents. Here's the genders. Here's the ethnicities of the parents, and you pretty much go through and like piecemeal which child you want to. Well, you don't purchase them technically, but
They don't use that language, but,
right,
oh,
but
what
that's
you-
what
that's
you're
doing.
right? So yeah, that's all the
And it all
grading
seems
stuff.
normal and good because of course you'd want to like
Pick the best child.
when you're spending money, you know, you like this car over that car, and then that's the point.
Right.
People
You're
aren't
treating them like
cars.
commodities.
Yeah.
Right.
And sorry, real quick, what's the grading system? Like what are
A, B,
the
C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay. And then there are oftentimes
No
if
Fs.
you're
Yeah, they
at
did
the
that.
if you're at the very last of that list, you're discarded.
Well, no, okay, so that depends.
Depends. Okay.
Okay, so you have these eggs, and usually at day 3 or 5, when they freeze them after they've graded them and done
Embryos.
all the testing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Embryos.
Embryos, not eggs. 5% goes to research and testing. Genetic testing and development of vaccines and
Yeah,
products.
and this is destructive embryonic research.
Right. So what we mean by that is these children are tortured and killed for the betterment of society.
Yeah.
That's what happens. And listening to the geneticists talk about this is wild.
Yeah.
Like it is insane, the things that they say.
Yeah.
And when you say that, when you use that language, tortured and killed, incarceration,
Right.
there's going to be a lot of people, and this is like something that's going to, it's a very ageist thing.
Right.
Even when we're thinking about a 20-week baby, we're already categorizing them differently than the embryo. And when we think about the embryo in the womb, that is the place where Jesus chose to take on flesh.
Right.
That is the place of the incarnation.
Right.
That they are just as human as you are.
Right.
If you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, it's an embryo, it's one cell.
Yeah.
They're just as human as you are. That's where you started.
You've been there.
Right.
Jesus has been there.
Yeah. At what point do you become a new instantiation of humanity that is individualized from every other instantiation of what it
moment
means to be human?
Of the beginning of your existence.
Right. So when I say tortured and killed, it does look different for a single-celled zygote.
Yeah.
Or I mean, by that point they're
Yeah,
a little bit larger. It looks different. I mean, you're not really tying somebody down and like cutting them open with this and that, but you might as well be.
For that human organism, that is what you're doing. You are still dismembering them and breaking them apart and stuff.
And you end up dead.
And you end up dead. As far as we know from everything scientifically, there's no feeling to this. But being murdered, like, is it literally okay to murder people if you also, give them an anesthetic?
Right.
Like, no.
And when I say incarceration, they are literally held in canisters
for over a decade sometimes.
Well,
with no due process.
It's true that something is always robbed from the unaware. It's like you can, when you kill somebody in their sleep and they have no consciousness, no recognition of the fact that they're being killed, is that any less robbing them of something of their life than to kill them when they're fully aware of it?
Right.
So when we're talking about embryos, killing a child in the womb is no less robbing someone of their life, murdering them, than it is to kill someone who is as old as I am, as old as Russell. There's no difference there as far as what you are taking from them.
Right. So like 5%.
In fact, you're taking more, because if you killed me right now, I had 26 years here.
You only got you got 20 more years with you.
See, I argue with people that those type of comments are ageist. I got into a big argument with somebody about that. Like, just because you've lived 27 years means that their life is more important? I don't think so. But that's an aside. And
they'll say that it's 20. Sorry,
like what you said. Like, I've had this long, so it's worse to kill them than me because I've had this long to live, and I'm saying not really.
Yeah. I mean, it's not worse on. When we think about the grace of God that He's given to me.
Right.
In being able to be here when I didn't deserve any of it.
Right.
That there is a certain amount of grace that I've been given that
it could be
people who die when they're young,
But there's also the same argument that you could say, well, the grace of God for them to not live long enough to compile sin more.
Yeah, because they do go to be with Him. But this is all to the side, because the thing is like.
Right.
They're murdered, and doesn't matter what God does in response to that. We're not supposed to murder. But before we left the thing on the ageism deal, like on Facebook, you have the person that comes up to you and they're like, okay, well, I've got a petri dish full of embryos and a baby, and I'm dropping them both. Which do you catch?
Right.
That people catch the baby.
Right.
It is just proof that we're ageist.
Right.
And I'm like, I started telling people I catch the embryos because it sounds terrible. It's like, hopefully if my brain is working most, I catch the embryos.
That and the baby would probably survive.
And the baby would survive and we could help them. And the embryos are more likely not to survive.
Well, the chances of the embryo surviving is like really slim. But that
or there's more of them.
Right.
Or something. They'll be like, there's 50 embryos and a baby. Who do you like the 50 embryos? What do you?
I'm actually glad there's some pushback on that stuff, because it's good to think about. It's
we
like
got to think through these implications.
But one of the things that I'm trying to emphasize with some of these comments is, don't be thinking that it's any less of a tragedy.
Right.
Because it's almost an overcorrection. It's like you're automatically thinking it's not as bad.
Right.
Don't be thinking that.
Right.
It's as bad.
It is as bad.
Yeah.
So we were talking like, okay, that's 5% goes towards the discarding through medical testing and stuff, right? The property is transferred to them to do the test. There's another category that just gets discarded. Right?
Yeah.
And that's either because they are a low grade,
unfit,
or the parents don't want to pay storage fees. So they're let to thaw and die and thrown away like trash.
You know, I don't have a cussing problem at all. But when we talk about this, I'm just like, what do I do with this? This makes me
just wait till the next part
angry.
then.
Yeah.
There's a thing called compassionate discard, because there are states that have no discard policies, which means they can't send the property to be tested on, and they cannot just discard.
I think this gets into what a lot of people I think are thinking, because they're thinking you're just talking about the worst kinds of IVF. They're thinking there's a good kind of IVF.
Oh, we'll get to
what
that.
A lot of people are thinking.
Right. We'll get to that too at the end.
When you talk about compassionate discard, I think that probably gets into a little bit more of that realm where people are thinking this is more okay.
Right. So here's what compassionate discard is. When you transfer the embryos into the woman, this is the second phase of IVF, right?
Or maybe I'm misunderstanding you. Sorry, go ahead.
The woman goes through hormonal treatments to link up her tricked body that thinks that it's pregnant with the thawing of the egg, so that when you transfer the egg to the uterus, it actually implants. Because you have to have that time to the day. Otherwise, it doesn't work. They intentionally either don't take their drugs, or they intentionally miscalculate the day to be off by 3 to 5 days.
So freaking sick.
So that
It's a miscarriage or not a failed implantation.
it's a failed implantation.
Yeah.
And that is the compassionate discard.
Because at least they're dying inside of your womb.
Right. I did the transfer, and
Goodness.
it was God that took over to not allow it to
Because
happen.
God could have
Right.
had the implantation. You did everything in your means to make your womb inhospitable for the child you had created.
Right.
Yeah, it's like tying up a child in your carrier around the neck and like just letting them die. It's like, oh, I'll just put them in the carrier, and
they're in the
they died that way, or I didn't put them into their car seat correctly, and they flew out when I stomped on the brakes really hard. You know, it's just this kind of like negligence where you're thinking,
It's
this
worse
is
than
somehow
negligence.
it's worse than negligence.
Right.
It's like you're thinking this is better because somehow it happened
Naturally.
in nature, like type thing.
Cover it up all you want. It happened with malice and forethought.
Right, it did. So the way other facilities that are in no discard states get around it is they transfer the property to another facility that is a discard facility, who will then in turn transfer the property to medical research or discard it. And when I said property, I meant a human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're using the language. And the side note to connect it to pretty much all the other stuff that we always do, these laws to make it compassionate,
Right.
they're written by good pro-lifers that are trying to be compassionate.
Right. So the last thing that happens with these embryos, you can store them, usually at about like $500 a year, indefinitely. And here's the thing: we have, of those like nearly 2 million, we don't know who a lot of the parents are.
Yeah.
Right. So they've lost track of, in some of them.
Yeah.
Of who actually owns this property. And so there are IVF doctors that don't want to kill them, but there's nothing they can do with them, because legally they can't transfer. You can't even adopt those children, because they have to be released by the owners, which is the parents, and because they don't know who the parents are.
Yeah.
You can't do anything with these children.
Yeah, and just for people, if this is like a ton of information that's just kind of blowing your mind, to the pastors who are listening to this especially, don't let the ethicists, SBC ethicists and whatnot tell you what to believe on IVF. Open up the Word of God, look at what is happening with this, and make your judgment from what God's Word says. They have failed on a lot of, like, majorly on this stuff.
God and the devil only knows what the ERLC says about
I want to
this.
get to that
Sorry to cut
in a
you
little
off.
bit later.
I think we have to have we have to get to them, because like I think that's so. I think that point is so serious that like we go all the way back to why are like good people in their Sunday school classes doing this?
Right.
Somebody like some priest or the ethicist for the denomination or whatever, they are partnering with the IVF folks to come up with compassionate discard.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
And not just compassionate discard, but saying, hey, having children is a good thing. So that's what we're doing. We're helping you fulfill God's design for you. Technology is great. You know,
this is being fruitful and multiplying.
Right.
That's why, I mean, there's millions and millions of them. That's
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's the second half of IVF. You go in and you get a transfer.
Yep.
Now, the attrition rate is insane, right? So that's one of the other problems is like you might fertilize 20 eggs, but when it gets down to what will actually work and become a human that is born, the success rate of a born child, you might get 3 or 4 out of that 20.
Yeah.
So you're rolling the dice and putting them in a situation to die, just so that you might have 1 to 4 work. And here's the other thing. So the IVF doctor that I talked to left his practice because of selective abortion, right? Like you want he would do IVF, get like 20 eggs, and they said, we don't want any girls, and you need to kill 14 of them. And that weighed on his conscience. He's like, I can't do that.
Or like selective reduction, where maybe you've implanted 2, and the person's like, no, I just really want 1, and so they will suction. They can get in and remove
and
1
do
child,
an abortion,
but leave the other one in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is that, and then there's you have couples that go, I just want 1. Now I have these 14 humans in storage. I don't want somebody else to have my child. So I am going to pay for their incarceration. And this is where due process comes into play. This child is being treated unjustly with no due process. They're being imprisoned, incarcerated.
Well, part of this too is it's cheaper to fertilize 14 eggs or however many.
That's where it comes down.
And then to freeze them for a very long period of time than it is to fertilize 1 and put in 1.
And it's also safer for the woman because you start doing so much of this type of treatment and cancer happens and all of these other
Each
things.
time you have a long period of tricking your body. I think you say it that way, tricking your body to believe that you're pregnant, or to believe that you've released an egg and that egg is, you know, because you have to get the womb, we don't need to be like the lining to be ready.
Right.
And so like you do this, and each time you do it, because we know people who are truly rescuing children by going through this process to make their bodies hospitable to adopt embryos.
Yeah. By adopting them, not by creating.
Not creating. Adopt embryos who have been created and abandoned.
Right.
And would be, we have friends who've got children who were in cryogenic prisons for 13 years.
Right.
And then adopted, implanted, and born. Right now, the Malones could be giving birth to, they have twin baby girls.
Right.
I don't know how old they are.
6 years.
6 years since conception.
Yeah, I was talking to Charity about that.
Yeah.
I was like, so how old were these babies? And she like gave the years old.
6 years.
Right. And I was like, wow, that's okay. That wasn't the question I was asking, but you're right.
Yeah.
You know?
What's so weird too is that, you're going to have people that are going to be born at some point where if they die at 100, their birth date will be somewhere in the middle of their life.
Right.
Because they've been in these situations for so long.
We have children that are born that are older than their the parents that gestated them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's wild. The whole thing, we should never get away from like the serious ethical, just destructive nature of this, but it's like this weird sci-fi world that we've ushered ourselves into.
Right.
And we could go off into this, this is crazy, like my kid's older than me. Mm-hmm. My kid's a different race than me, and like
my grandmother gave birth to me.
Yeah, and now we're getting. It's
You
not.
know,
It's not Brave
that
New
was
World.
just-
It's Strange New
That
World.
was a couple of months ago. A homosexual couple.
Yep.
They bought fertilized eggs, and his mother gave birth to her
Son.
granddaughter.
Yeah.
And it was from his
Sperm and
spermatozoid.
Yeah. And that's just, I mean, I think that's a good part to just talk about the real quickly, the design of God when he designed women and men, and that he opens the womb.
Right.
Like when you have these kinds of moral atrocities where homosexual couples who are not fruitful and cannot multiply are paying to have a child created and
Right.
using a surrogate to make that happen.
Right.
It's like God opens the womb. Maybe that's getting ahead of this, but yeah.
That's an indictment against Christians because by the light of nature, they know they're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. And even in their defiance to God for that design, they know that their lives are unsustainable.
Yeah.
And they have to reproduce, and this is the only way to do it. That should be an indictment against Christians that are unwilling, that are intentionally not having children.
Yeah.
Right. But here's the other thing that goes into with what you're saying, and that ties into the ethical IVF that they
Yes,
talk about.
because you hear about that. It's like, oh, yeah, I agree with you about this, but I'm doing it ethically.
Right. So Christians, by and large, still support IVF that ends with the murder and the torture and the freezing of children. They do. Sometimes you will have them point to what they call is ethical IVF. This happens 0.01% of all IVF.
0.01%.
But it happens just enough
Right.
for you to point to it and say, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And
And
the IVF industry hates this.
Yeah.
They push back against it.
It's costly.
It's very costly. And so here's what happens.
it gives them a bad name too.
It does give them a bad name.
Because
Well-
wait, what is the other 99.9? Unethical IVF.
Yeah. And 0.1% is the so-called ethical IVF, but
0.01.
0.01%.
Right.
But that is kind of a misnomer right there. Ethical IVF.
Right. So there are Christians, and it's mainly Christians that are doing this form of IVF. And honestly, this is one of the aspects that I struggled with the most because children are not killed and they are not frozen. What they do is same treatment before, the hormones, and they recover whatever word they happen to be using, rescue 20 eggs, and they freeze the eggs. So they're not freezing humans. And then when the woman's body recuperates, they thaw 1 egg or 2 eggs at a time, fertilize them, and transfer them. And that is their ethical way of doing it. And what's interesting about this is Ryan Anderson, he's a Catholic that has been writing about IVF for a long time.
Yeah.
And
Homosexuality and stuff
a
like
whole
that
bunch
too.
of things. He runs the ethics policy something center.
For Beelzebub.
The Center for Beelzebub.
Yeah, the Ethical Center for Treating Human Beings as Commodities.
Right. So he's
Beelzebub,
against
New York.
IVF, right? But in 2008, he was writing about this going, okay, it's good to have arguments against murder and freezing children. Those are good things to do. But what are you going to do when technology reaches a point where you're no longer killing or freezing humans? What's your argument going to be then? And I think he's right. Those are good arguments, but how do we address this?
Like, it's always good to see where it's going and prepare to.
And this is before that was legal in the United States. They were doing it in Italy, but it wasn't until 2012 that we started doing that in the United States. And I know of Christian couples that are trying to research this. They recognize that killing children is wrong, that freezing children is wrong, but they still want children. And this was the most ethical way that they could do it. And they're like, am I really in sin? And I did really struggle with this. And I have an idea of why I think it's wrong, but I haven't fully articulated why?
Because part of the process, I mean, because just to connect, you are making a documentary and you are interviewing tons of people,
right?
And I know how you work,
right?
You're formulating it and you're testing things,
right?
And it's okay that it's kind of like there's a sense where something is
wrong but,
here, but how do we say it,
right?
And the other side is like, we know we're doing something wrong here, but like, how can we say it?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's kind of the trot out the toddler thing. In some ways, it's like you're going to put your child in a very vulnerable position, regardless.
Yeah, and yes, but I think it's more than that, right? So, first off, I want to say I am for technology. This is not I'm an anti-technology person. I think that's the wrong approach.
You look like a Luddite.
I'm just morally opposed to headphones.
Right. Well, I am too,
Except
and
for
I
when I'm
hate
using
coming here to do that. And I'm like, okay. No, so I think it's good to use technology, medical stuff, and I think it's good to have a male doctor do an exam on a woman to see why she's infertile and fix the problem, like her fallopian tubes twisted or whatever.
Yeah, Dominion mandate, we should be doing what we can.
That is not introducing somebody else into your marriage bed, the preventative stuff and medical treatment. I also am for technology once there's a human that's created and we're doing life-saving measures to help preserve and give this child a place to live, whether they're in the womb, out of the womb, to the point of their death. But I think that in the creation of the human, I think that part of God's design is the joining of a man and a woman, husband and wife, physically. I think that there is something very important about that action.
Yeah.
And that joining that is important for procreation.
Yeah, it's also connected to the creation of life. It's like the thing that the man and the woman do to bring about the life of the child, and then God opening or closing the womb, and then their whole emotional, I mean, people are like trying to get pregnant. So they're like, we're not rated R, but like we're trying to get pregnant.
Right.
We know when we have technological or information knowledge, when to do what you need to do. And it's a big process.
That introducing somebody else in that act,
and it no longer really being an act.
Right. And removing the act itself from the creation of that human. I think that's where the problem is. And like I said, I haven't fully developed how to say that completely, but my intuition is that's where the issue is. And it's in the creation of the human. So this would be different.
The intuition is kind of like God designed it this way.
Right.
We can make a human without doing it the way God designed it.
Right.
And so I think there's like a natural recoil.
Right.
And that's where the intuition might come from.
Yeah.
So I was talking to Josh about this, right? And if we're only talking, and we don't specify and designate the creation of the human, then things like embryo adoption are also bad because you've removed the act from that. But my argument isn't. My argument is solely about the creation of the human.
Yeah, not the rescue.
Right, not the rescue, because now that human is created, now I'm for the technology and all of the things to help preserve and sustain and give that child a home, whether it's in the womb or even outside of the womb, right?
Right.
So, like I said, it is something that I'm working on, but regardless, we're talking about a small fraction. It's something we need to deal with and something we need to talk about, but we should not point to that 0.01% of what they call ethical to justify what Christians are doing mostly, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I'm not going to name any names, but I do know like a pastor who would say IVF is most of the time bad. Okay. But there's such a thing as ethical IVF. And he'd argue for ethical IVF. And then his daughter, he would say, is doing ethical IVF.
And she's not.
And she's not.
Right. And that actually happens quite often. Very rarely are people doing this so-called ethical IVF, but they use it as a platform to justify the rest of it. And most of the time when Christians say they're doing ethical IVF, what they're doing is they're freezing 5 embryos instead of 20.
Yeah. And when they're doing ethical IVF, they're paying a doctor who's also doing unethical IVF for 100 other people.
They're still participating in this evil system.
Yeah. And we got real into this podcast, but we didn't show a clip that we were supposed to show more towards the beginning. So we're going to show that real quick and just give you a kind of a taste of what the documentary is going to look like. So that's what this looks like.
My name is Cali. I am a pastor of a small particular Baptist church in South Texas. Early in 2015, I began going out to the abortion clinics in San Antonio to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and redemption in his blood. We offer assistance and we call murderous parents hired killers and those protecting them to repent and believe. My wife and I could see that there was a clear urgency for the lives of these children and the souls of everyone there at the final lines. We began to understand that we needed to engage the broader culture that hates God and loves death. We took the message of reconciliation to the streets downtown. We proclaimed truth at the local universities. We highlighted the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ and the image of God that man bears. Our discussions explored the implications and responsibilities of man because of the image of God. We see our duty to love our neighbors as an expression of our love for our Creator. It is a common occurrence on the college campuses to have a pro-abortion advocate bring up the topic of IVF as a way to expose inconsistencies that many professing Christians have in their approach to the various sanctity of life issues. These distractors have a fair critique against Christians at this point. Most do not have a consistent application of the implications derived from the intrinsic value, dignity, and worth found in the image of our Creator. I had to investigate our righteous desire for family and children given by God as a blessing. I had to find the balance with expressing compassion for those struggling with infertility and not enable the idolatry of seeking satisfaction only in the creation of a biological child after the likeness of their parents. I had to join in the suffering of barren couples and warn of the suffering and inhumane treatment of the preborn human children created in IVF. I needed to bring awareness to these children and treat them in a consistent way due their image-bearing value, dignity, and worth. This started me on this journey to understand embryo adoption.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be really powerful. I think if anything, I think it's going to change a lot of minds on things like IVF, and I think it's going to convict a lot of people to do embryo adoption. But I also think it's just going to be the first time a lot of people have even thought about it.
Right.
Because I don't think a lot of people have given it that much thought, and I think that is going to be a really good means to get people questioning even IVF and whether or not they should be engaged in embryo adoption and that sort of thing.
And not just among like the church or people, but like even among abolitionists.
Right, right.
People who follow you and your work as an abolitionist are going to be getting their minds opened up a lot.
Yeah, so this documentary wasn't specifically about IVF, right? But you have to talk about IVF because that's where these children that are being frozen come from, right? So it's overarching about embryo adoption and what all that entails. But we have to deal with some of the questions of where these children come from and trying to think through the questions about IVF, I think are really important. But before we talk about the documentary, I want to point to Rescue Those. Dusty just wrote this pamphlet. It's really good about IVF. Right. So go check out the rescuethose.com and look at that pamphlet because it's going to give a lot of this information.
Yeah.
And questions that we should think about.
Right. Yeah. And also watch Dusty's talk on Rescue Those and your talk on Rescue Those
There's
about
two
IVF.
talks there,
yeah, because I think when people hear a lot of this information, like if you're like me, a young, zealous fella, you want to go write a very fiery, angry Facebook post about how this is terrible, and I get the impulse for sure, but watch those talks and just get a sense of the tone that we're, going with here, because this is an extremely painful thing for a lot of people. Infertility is no joke. It's not something that you can take lightly.
Right.
And you should be picking up and learning from the tone that they're communicating, the information that they're communicating, but also use that as a resource to send to people that have questions about IVF.
Yeah.
Because those were well-crafted talks that were very informational, and they are also very well put. Like they weren't carelessly put at all.
Yeah, I think we need to approach this with a lot of compassion, really, because these are real people in our congregation that are suffering from infertility. They want the blessing of children from God. They want that.
And they're people who they do not want to murder children.
Right.
They don't want to do anything to cause it. So it's
There's
a
a
weird
big
thing.
ignorance component here, because
Yes.
it's not like we're saying talk compassionately about the person per se who murders their baby in an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
It's people that didn't know the information because a lot of people kept it from them or just didn't talk about it.
Or they haven't thought through they haven't thought through all of the implications of everything that's happening. So I would suggest be really patient and really compassionate to the suffering that they are going through. Walk with them in that suffering, weep with them, grieve with them, and warn them of idolatry.
Yeah.
Like at what lengths will you go to be satisfied by this thing that is not God, right? It's a good thing to want, but at what point is that idolatry where you will do anything to have a child after your own likeness, right? Or are you willing to have some of them killed, have some of them frozen?
Yeah.
These are questions we need to ask, but we need to do it understanding that they want a good thing and walk with them in that.
Yeah.
So because that's really how my documentary started.
It's you walking through it.
Right. I have friends that are suffering with infertility, so I interviewed them. I interviewed couples that have done embryo adoption. We traced one family's whole journey through this embryo adoption process to where the twins are born and they're revealed in it, right? I talked to pastors on how to counsel their congregation on infertility, IVF. What is their responsibility as pastors to lead their congregation in repentance, right? And really, I also talked to an IVF doctor, right? And that was eye-opening. That actually caused me to be more compassionate and want to turn this not just in a documentary, but to release the entire interviews over a period of time later.
Yeah.
So you can hear everything that these people are saying.
And so when we there's a lot of stuff that you've gone through just looking at this documentary. A lot of people you've talked to, a lot of interviews and stuff, and a lot of kind of shocking stuff from people that are supposed to be communicating all this stuff to us.
Right.
So I'm sure that we're going to get into it on another episode.
We are going to have you back. Where I know after the documentary comes out,
right?
And there's a whole other thing. I mean, we've talked at length in our office, just off camera, about sort of like trying to get ethicists at seminaries and then why they're not talking to you, why they don't want to appear in it.
What he's saying is I was rejected by over 24 ethicists and seminaries to the point where I've put a segment in my documentary to read their emails as
just
to
the rejection. Even people who agree that I just can't because my board. So we will go. We're not going to go in. We want to have you back for that.
Right.
But to cap this show off, just because we got to come to an end. You are producing this, editing filming it right now, but the aim date for release, September
15th and 16th. The Pro-Life is Not Enough conference this year. It's a conference that goes on. This is the third one.
Yeah, it's a yearly abolitionist conference in Texas, Dallas area.
And so this year it's going to be in September the 15th and 16th. And the theme is IVF. I'm going to be releasing the documentary there. We have a couple of speakers. It's Matt Burke is going to be providing a position paper on IVF. I am going to be speaking about idolatry, contentment, and God closing the womb. Russell, you're going to be speaking about the incarnation and how we should look at IVF through the incarnation. And let's see. Dusty Devers is going to be speaking on ethics and worship, and Blake Gideon is going to be speaking on a shepherd's responsibility, how to walk with couples that are infertile, how to rally repentance within the congregation to rescue the children from your congregation. The stuff that he says is incredible.
Yeah.
So
we're going to have sort of like theological, ethical, pastoral,
right,
and the release of
the
documentary. And so that's the 15th and the 16th this September.
Right. We haven't really been promoting it because of this conference that just ended yesterday. So you can expect to start seeing a lot of event pages and flyers.
Go ahead and mark that down.
Right.
Need to get to Dallas for this, especially if this is, something just please come.
Right.
We'll get the actual location. The Liberator podcast, the Resisting Balaam podcast, we're kind of co-sponsoring hosting it along with Phil George, the pastor that is regularly hosting the Pro-Life is Not Enough conferences. So it's going to be top-notch, good, serious, good time of fellowship, learning, and being Christian in a culture that does this to children.
Yeah, and this is just sort of an off-the-fly thing. I don't know how set the schedule is, but if there is one of those aforementioned ethicists who's listening to this, I'm sure we'd be more than willing to fit in some kind of interview on stage with you. That would be amazing if you could just ask some of these hard questions. If someone is brave enough to do that.
Yeah.
We've reached out to two of them. Hopefully that we've extended an invitation. We'll
this would be a beautiful round table discussion,
right?
Not a debate necessarily, but I would love to hear it because I think it's becoming very clear,
right?
At least what the justice issues are and what the mercy issues are, what's the biblical response. But I think there's just so much that's been built up, what they say. How is it that Christians in our culture are practicing this along with the homosexuals,
right,
and the various pagans? And so,
how do we separate participating in the industry versus rescuing these children?
Yeah,
these are some of the questions that we need to ask.
You've seen people who are they're rightly opposed to the IVF industry. And then they're also opposed to embryo adoption because the only way to do an embryo adoption is to, use these, the nuclear transfer and all that kind of stuff is going to be at an IVF clinic.
Right.
So, that's a big question we need to answer for people who are struggling with it.
Right. And that's really what I wanted to do in my documentary is pose questions. have you thought about this? These are some of the questions we need to start thinking through in our approach to compassionately walk around these infertile couples and talk about the damage that IVF does and rescue these children, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's going to be great.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a really good conference. And if you're curious about all this stuff, if you want all the information, just come to it. Even if you're like a pro-lifer, you know, if you're someone who's like, you hate abolitionists, here's an opportunity to just come and listen to a topic that is not strictly our immediatism in your face all the time.
Pro-lifers are always welcome to everything.
and here's the crazy thing. I tried to interview non-abolitionists, and I got a couple, but for the most part,
The abolitionists are willing to speak on this.
Right.
It's just it is another one of these things where
right.
there's a pretty clear line.
But a lot of abolitionists still don't have a consistent view of this because it's not something that we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on the edges. We've made mention about it before, but it's not
And really
something that we've really worked through extensively.
Yeah.
It's recently.
Trying to repent a bit of that because it's hard.
Right.
But it is as many or more each year. Image bearers being lost to this sort of thing. So we do have to do it as difficult as it is, as sensitive as it is, as much sort of knowledge it's going to take to catch people up. It's very important that we do it, that we have documentaries, books, pamphlets, position papers, conferences.
Right.
So we'll advertise this in all the Liberator podcasts from now till September, but we will put as much information as we can in the description below.
Yep. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but we have not been on our A game this episode with technology. The content has been awesome. Our technology has been a little off. We've got multiple things we're doing at the moment. And our
to your credit, our technology is spread out over multiple states right now.
Yeah.
We're streaming a rally.
All of them crashing at the same time.
Yeah. We're streaming an Abolition Day rally in some other state right now.
Trying to hold it all together with like toothpaste and fish sticks or something.
Yeah. And fish sticks, lo and behold, children don't hold anything together.
Yeah, there you go. Anyways, we've got another interview right up here, so we're going to end this episode. We could have gone so much longer, and I'm sure we're going to have another.
Hey, let me
Have to
promote
have you
my documentary page and stuff like that.
Yep.
All right, so go to rescuethose.com. Check out Dusty Deaver's pamphlet. It was lost in shipping, delayed in shipping, so we don't have them right now. Yeah. But they are.
It'll be good when they
it's
come
up. Right. It's up on the site. You can order them, read through it. It's really helpful stuff. Like you said, go check out their the two from the last conference.
And on that pamphlet, it's probably one of the only in existence of that type of literature, really.
Well,
it's so hard
there's
to find
physician papers on it that are really good,
but not
not
popularized.
meant for the masses type
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely not in pamphlet form like what Dusty did.
Yeah.
So
there's
get
that, and then there's for people. I want to say this for folks that have watched this and like, man, I want to see this documentary made. I want to help. Cali's traveling around doing a lot of these interviews. It's like a lot of gas. It's a lot of hotels. And so you might want to contribute to the successful production of the film.
Yeah.
So they go to
my website. It is crcali.com, and there's a tab on there for documentary, and there's a donation page or a donation link. On that page,
and just a little bit about the project.
There's a little bit about the project. I need to upload some more stuff on it. Because I'm filming this myself. I'm editing it myself, doing all the sound production, and it's kind of taxing. But
One man band.
Yeah. But I think it's an important topic that we need to start asking questions about.
Right. Yeah.
So go to my website, check it out if you would like to support. I would appreciate it.
And I'll have that in the description, so you can just click it there and go and donate.
Pro-Life is Not Enough conference. We'll have information about that.
Rescue those for the pamphlet.
Correct.
This has been episode 79 of the Liberator podcast, where we're committed to being as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. We'll see you next week.
3-time champion. What's up?
I'm including that in there.